Breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to PMQs Live with me, Gloria De Piero. In a few minutes, we will be going live to the Commons for Prime Minister's questions. But first, I'll be discussing the Rwanda flight farce and more with my political panel. And Home Secretary Priti Patel will be giving a statement to Parliament immediately after Prime Minister's questions. And, of course, we will bring you that live. Give me your political briefing and verdict on PMQs. Send in your views and opinions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at GBNews. Now, let's have a chat with my fabulous political panel. Steve McCabe, Labour MP for Birmingham Selly Oak, here with me in the studio, and Marco Longhi, the Conservative MP for Dudley North, who joins us remotely from Westminster. Steve, let's start with you. If you had a Prime Minister's question today, what would you ask?
Well, I think I'd say what's his greatest levelling up achievement is rising unemployment, rising inflation or rising interest rates.
So straight for the jugular. That's your style. Let's ask Marco Longhi, who's there in Westminster for us. Marco, good to see you.
Hi there, Gloria. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Thank you so much, Marco, for being with us. We had a few transport problems today. Thank you for joining us remotely. If you had a Prime Minister's question today, what would you be asking the PM?
I would be urging the Prime Minister to do all he can in light of the developments of the last 48 hours to ensure that we have a British Bill of Rights well in train, to ensure that we won't have a third-party entity, whatever that may be, deciding upon the what happens in our country, in our institutions.
Just on the actual policy, the Rwanda policy, we read that Prince Charles isn't too happy about it. Many leading church figures have also spoken out about it, saying it is humane. What is your view on the policy?
My view, Gloria, that the humane thing to do is to ensure that the United Kingdom stops being the magnet that it is right now. We do have safe routes. They can apply, and what people can do if they want to come to this country legally is to follow those processes. We then need to ramp up our effort together with other countries to make sure that in situ, in these countries where these people come from, they have the best opportunities to want to live and work wherever they are. So for me, it's about making sure that we move forward in an honourable way, which I know will always be the way that the United Kingdom takes. OK.
Steve, Marco has a point, the point about who runs Britain, whether it is our elected government, our courts or the European Court.
Well, of course, the European Court of Human Rights is effectively the British Court of Human Rights. It's Churchill's creation. So, you know, when it suits us, we like to claim it. When it doesn't suit us, we hear what Marco is saying. Look, the question I really want to ask about this is, what kind of asylum policy are we running? I've just written to the Home Secretary to ask how one of the people scheduled to be on that flight should be an Iranian police commander who was on the run from the mullahs because he refused to open fire on innocent protesters. Now, by any standards, you'd think that case deserves proper consideration and scrutiny. How many other people like him were scheduled to be on that flight?
The suggestion or the danger for the Labour Party is that you are quick to come up with criticisms of the policy, but actually the Labour Party has no solution, no alternative solution for dealing with the problem of people arriving here illegally on small boats.
Well, I mean, I don't personally think that's true. I mean, I think there are three immediate things that need to happen. One, we need a proper, fast system to assess those who are genuine asylum seekers, people with skills, sometimes doctors. Get them working, get them earning in the British economy, get them on with their life. Identify those who are not legitimate asylum seekers. And the only way to deal with them is to actually make agreements with other countries so that you can send them back. The only difference with Rwanda and the other countries is that we've burnt our boats with the other countries. We can't actually send them back from whence they came. So now, at massive expense to the taxpayer, we're going to send them to a third country. That doesn't strike me as the smartest way to proceed.
OK. OK, let's cross back to Marco now. I think.
Hi there.
Yes. Hello, Marco. Hello. We've had a good ding-dong on that. Unless you want to come back, I would like to move on.
Come back if that's
OK, yeah, please do.
I will come back because what we don't see, aside from the 27, 28 people who died trying to make that desperate crossing from Calais, which we all know in France is a very safe country, we don't ever get to hear about the people who might live in other countries such as Somalia and Eritrea, Afghanistan, who, when they leave their country, are having to undertake an incredibly dangerous journey there. They could come to harm there. So what we must do is make sure that a very strong message goes out that if you come to the United Kingdom illegally, you will not be given work, like Steve says. You will be assessed outside of this country, and that place now, we've reached a very good agreement with Rwanda, which is a great country to be. I don't know if you've seen the news lately. They can be assessed there. So we need to remove ourselves from the ECHR, keep all the good bits, but make sure that, we don't give lefty lawyers the opportunity to make spurious claims for these people. Otherwise, all we are doing is playing into the hands of these unscrupulous traffickers who are making lots and lots of money at the expense of people's lives and the British taxpayer.
Let Steve have a final reply on
the only point I'd make is anyone who's fleeing a brutal regime must be going illegally to another country, because you don't get your papers stamped by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard when they're threatening to murder you.
Yes, France is very dangerous, isn't it, Gloria? France is really dangerous.
Well, I mean, it's a fair point, actually, Marco.
It's so dangerous.
You make a fair point. France is not dangerous.
No, well, no one's saying that France is dangerous. I'm talking about people who are fleeing the Iranian mullahs. And, if we really want to tackle the folk who are organising it, Marco, when was the last time you saw anyone who was organising the transport of people in little boats, any of these gangsters? When was the last time you saw anyone of those prosecuted by the British authorities?
Right. Shall we leave that? Because we've got a couple of minutes left, and I just want to move on to another question, which I'm going to start with you, Steve. Keir Starmer is boring. So say voters in focus groups. And apparently the Labour leader asked his shadow cabinet colleagues yesterday at the shadow cabinet meeting, of which I was a member, and my goodness, those meetings are boring, whoever's leader, to stop saying he's boring. He's dull. It's a problem.
Well, look, if being honest, hard-working, diligent and competent makes you a bit dull and boring, I'm kind of for it. I'd rather have Clem Attlee in a month of Sundays than I'd have somebody who doesn't know which story he's told yesterday from which story he's going to tell tomorrow.
Marco, do you ever wish that Boris Johnson was a bit more boring?
Not at all. And I fully support Keir Starmer staying in his position. Thank you.
How is the mood on your benches after that rather brutal no confidence vote, which, of course, Prime Minister won, but my goodness, there was a lot of discontent on those backbenchers. Are they all buttoning it now?
I think one of the things you've seen, Gloria, is that the Conservative Party is a very, very broad church. So you have people with very different views within it. And this was an opportunity for them to actually say, we're not very happy with this, we're not very happy with that. And so they cast their votes accordingly. But I will say, with 211 votes of support, the Prime Minister had more votes in favour than the combined number of Labour and Lib Dem MPs together.
Is Keir Starmer going to lead you into the next general election?
Oh, I don't think there's much doubt about that at all. You know, I mean, Marco says everything's hunky-dory. Ask him next week after the by-elections how hunky-dory everything is then. I was up in Wakefield earlier and, you know, people are leaving the Conservative Party. Support is draining away from them in droves. So I think it might be 211 at the moment. I'd like to see what would happen if they ran it again after the by-elections.
Mark, are you feeling... in fact, I won't put words in your mouth. How are you feeling ahead of those two by-elections next week?
I think that any government that is mid-term, particularly one that's been in charge of the country for over 12 years now, is always going to be suffering. So any government that is actually probably less than 20 points behind its main opposition would be probably doing very well.
Marco, thank you. We are going... And Steve, thank you. We're going live to the Commons. It's Prime Minister's Question Time.
I hope as many members as possible will be able to attend. I'd also like to point out that... Just a minute. Apologies. I'd also like to point out, not this sign language, that the sign language interpretation of PMQ proceedings is available on Parliament Live TV. Now we start with questions to Prime Minister Mike Wood.
Question number one, sir.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Mike Wood.
Government support for households is greatly appreciated, but high energy costs are also causing massive problems for businesses and particularly energy-intense manufacturing. Will the Prime Minister support the Repowering the Black Country initiative, backed by the LEP and by Andy Street, to reduce reliance on fossil fuels, and will he meet with me to look at how the Black Country can be a pilot project to decarbonise, reduce costs and protect the region's manufacturing jobs?
Well, I thank my honourable friend that he's a great champion for Dudley and for the Black Country, and in addition to the £1,200 for the 8 million most vulnerable households that we're providing, £400 to help everybody with the cost of energy, Mr. Speaker. We're supporting the Black Country with cost-efficient energy infrastructure, and the region has already received £1.5 million to develop a cluster plan for decarbonisation.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I pay tribute to all those who served in the Falklands? My uncle was among them, serving on the HMS Antelope when it went down. Thankfully, he made it back, but too many serving in that war didn't, and we remember them all. Mr. Speaker, Britain is set for lower growth than every major economy except Russia. Why?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, well, I'll tell him. Mr. Speaker, actually, we are going to have, according to the IMF and the OECD, we are, in addition to the fastest growth in the G7 last year, we're going to have the second fastest this year, and we will return to the top of the table, Mr. Speaker. But the reason, Mr. Speaker, other countries are temporarily moving ahead is, of course, because we came out of the pandemic faster than they did, because we took the right decisions to come out of lockdown, which he opposed, Mr. Speaker. And that's why, right now, Mr. Speaker, we have the highest number of people on payroll employment on record, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, he always likes to blame global forces, but global forces are just that, global. Everybody faces them. Britain isn't under crippling economic sanctions like Russia. No wonder he doesn't want to answer the question, why is the UK set for lower growth than every other major economy.
Prime Minister!
Mr. Speaker, I think everybody can see that I've just answered the question. Once again, he's guilty of what my legal friends call ignoratio elenchi. He's failed to listen to what I've actually said, Mr. Speaker. What would be useful in supporting the UK economy right now would be if the leader of the Labour Party ended his sphinx-like silence about the RMT strikes coming up in the course of the next couple of weeks. Will he now break with his shadow Transport Secretary and denounce Labour's rail strikes?
He's in government.
Just to remind the Prime Minister, he seems to have gone. It's Prime Minister's question, it's not opposition question. Keir Starmer.
He's in government. He could do something to stop the strikes, but he hasn't lifted a finger. I don't want the strikes to go ahead, but he does. He wants, Mr. Speaker, he wants the country to grind to a halt so he can feed off the division. And as for, Mr. Speaker, as for his boasting about the economy, he thinks he can perform Jedi mind tricks on the country. These aren't the droids you're looking for. No rules were broken. The economy is booming. The problem is, the Force just isn't with him anymore. He thinks he's Obi-Wan Kenobi. The truth is, he's Jabba the Hutt. Last week, he stood there and boasted that we would continue to grow the economy. This week, it turns out, the economy shrank for the second month in a row. How does it help Britain to have an ostrich Prime Minister with his head in the sand?
Prime Minister. There he goes again, Mr. Speaker, running this country down when everybody we've got the highest employment, payroll employment.
Look, I want to hear the questions and the answers, and whether you like it, but I genuinely believe it, the public who watch it also want to hear both. Prime Minister.
I mean, Mr. Speaker, we've got lower unemployment than France, Germany, Italy, Canada. We've got the highest number of people in payroll jobs, as I've just said, 620,000 more since records began. And he might like to know this, that just in the first 5 months of this year, this country has attracted, I think, £16 billion of investment in its tech sector. He doesn't like these European comparisons. Let's make it for him. 3 times as much as Germany, twice as much as France, Mr. Speaker. He should be talking this country up, not running it down.
That's the ostrich. He's not just denying how bad things are, he's actively making things worse. His 15 tax rises are throttling growth, and the director of the CBI is so fed up, he's reduced to saying, can we stop Operation Save Big Dog and move to action stations on the economy? Now, Mr. Speaker, we know what the Prime Minister says about British business in private. I think that's pretty unparliamentary. But when did screwing business turn from a flippant comment into economic policy?
Well, Mr. Speaker, look, I just reminded the House of what's happening in Tech Week in this country, the massive investment that's coming in, helped, by the way, by this 130% super deduction for business investment that my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, has put in. Never forget, Mr. Speaker, that Labour, under Labour, taxes go up on businesses and on people. We're not only putting £1,200 more into people's pockets, we're having a tax cut worth £330. He talks about taxes, £330 on average for everybody who pays national insurance. Labour have already made spending commitments in this Parliament alone worth £94 billion more than the government is spending. That's £2,100 for every household in the country, Mr. Speaker. No wonder no Labour government has ever left office with unemployment lower than when they came in.
Mr. Speaker, 15 tax rises, and we're sacked for the highest tax burden since rationing. He says the economy is booming when it's shrinking. he's game playing so much. He thinks he's on Love Island. Trouble is, Prime Minister, I'm reliably informed that contestants that give the public the ick get booted out. And it's not just low growth. He's also lost control of inflation. He was warned about this last September. And what did he do? He dismissed it. He didn't act. He sat on his hands. Now prices are through the roof, and we're set to have the highest inflation in the G7. When will he accept he got it badly wrong when he claimed that worries about inflation were unfounded?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we're helping people with the cost of living with £1,200. On the 14th of July, the money will be going into people's bank accounts. Why can we do that, Mr. Speaker? Because we have the fiscal firepower to do it, because the economy is in robust shape, with record numbers of people in payroll employment, Mr. Speaker. And that is thanks to the steps that we took that he continuously opposed. And if he wants to, and I just remind Mr. Speaker, he has a chance. I won't say this interrogatively, Mr. He has the chance now to clear it up. He can oppose the Labour's rail strikes right now. Say he can disagree. He can disagree, and give him that opportunity. Let him disagree with the union barons who would add to people's costs in the coming weeks.
Mr. Speaker, I don't want the strikes to go ahead. He does so he can feed on the division. Mr. Speaker, they're making a lot of noise now, but I've got a long list here of what his MPs really think of him. Yeah. Dragging everyone down. Who said that? Yeah. Come on. Who was it said that? Authority is destroyed. Come on, hands up. Which of you was it? Which of you? Come on. Can't win back trust. Anybody owning up? You're very quiet now. Hands. Mr. Speaker, my personal favourite is this. This is a document circulated by his backbench, in which they call him the Conservative Corbyn. Exactly. Prime Minister, I don't think that was intended as a compliment. Week after week, he stands there and spouts the same nonsense. The economy's booming. Everything's going swimmingly. The people should be grateful. But whilst he's telling Britain that we never had it so good, millions of working people and businesses know the reality. Britain's growth is going to be slower than our competitors and our inflation higher. A Prime Minister who sounds totally deluded, totally failing on the economy, failing to tackle...
I think we need to get to the end of the question, but But I'll just remind you, I will hear the end of the question in silence. Any more noise in this corner, there'll be another cup of tea early if we're not careful. Yes,
a Prime Minister who sounds totally deluded, totally failing the economy, failing to tackle inflation, failing to back business, failing to help working people through the crisis. And, Mr. Speaker, his big idea, go back to imperial measurements. He's got 80s inflation, 70s stagnation. Now he wants 60s wage to complete the set. When is he going to ditch the gimmicks and face up to reality that under him, Britain's economy is going backwards?
Let's see the Prime Minister. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, a couple of quick points about Mr. Corbyn, the Right Honourable for Islington North. First of all, he tried repeatedly to get him elected as Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker. Secondly, speaking from experience, he's relatively dynamic by comparison with the Right Honourable gentleman, Mr. Speaker. Dynamic and coherent.
Might be helpful if you speak to me. I'm struggling to hear because of the noise on both sides. So please, if you If you look to the chair, it'll be easier for both of us.
But what we're going to get on and do, Mr. Speaker, is continue to take the tough decisions to take this country forward, and decisions that are on the side of the British people, Mr. Speaker. They're blatantly on the side of the RMT union barons. When there are some ticket offices that barely sell 1 ticket per hour, Mr. Speaker, we are on the side of the travelling public. By the way, he hasn't mentioned this, but they're on the side of the people traffickers who would risk people's lives at sea, Mr. Speaker. And we are on the side of people who come here safely and legally. Safely and legally, Mr. Speaker. They carp and snipe from the sidelines. That's what they've always done. We take the big decisions to take this country forward. And no matter how much Welly his right honourable friend, the deputy leader, may ask him to apply, it doesn't matter how much Welly he pretends to apply, when that Welly, Mr. Speaker, is always on the left foot.
Many areas like mine have already had massive new housing development with no commensurate increase in general practice.
Sorry. Point of order. The Honourable Lady's been here for so long, she should also know that points of order can only come at the end. Stand to son.
Oh dear.
Many areas.
Have a conversation later, but certainly it's not.
Many areas like mine have already had massive new housing development with no commensurate increase in general practice capacity. In one of my surgeries, with double the recommended number of patients per GP, a bowel cancer diagnosis of a 51-year-old father of 4 was missed and is now terminal. Getting this right is a life and death issue. So will the Prime Minister make sure that parts of the country that have already had massive new housing growth get the commensurate increase in general practice capacity that is only right and fair?
Prime Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and of course we've increased the numbers of doctors by 6,000, up to 1,200 more GPs since this time last year, 11,800 more nurses, but we must make sure that areas, particularly where areas of new sensitive development is going in, that there are the infrastructure services, particularly medical services, that they need. The NHS has a statutory duty to take account of population growth. I know he's met my honourable friend, the Health Secretary. I will take it up personally to make sure we get a proper approach to, I think, a very, very important issue.
Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I join you and others that are remembering today the Falklands conflict of 40 years ago, and those like my colleague Keith Brown, the Scottish Justice Minister, that served there, and in particular our thoughts are with those that paid the ultimate sacrifice. Mr. Speaker, yesterday our First Minister started a national conversation on Scotland's right to choose an independent future. When we look at nations like Iceland, Ireland, Norway and Denmark, it is clear that our neighbours are outperforming the United Kingdom. They deliver greater income equality, lower poverty rates, higher productivity, social mobility and business investment. Mr. Speaker, the list goes on and on. The evidence is overwhelming. Scotland is being held back by Westminster. Prime Minister, all those countries can use the powers of independence to create wealthier, fairer and greener societies. Why not Scotland?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't doubt my right honourable friend's talents as a conversationalist, but I think there are other subjects in the national conversation right now, and they include, Mr. Speaker, what we're doing to come through the aftershocks of COVID with the strongest jobs-led recovery of any European economy. As I said, 620,000 more people across the whole of the UK, Mr. Speaker, in payroll employment than there were before the pandemic began. And I think another subject of national conversation is investment into our whole country, investment in Scotland, investment across the whole of the UK, as I mentioned already, in the tech centre. and the whole of the UK standing strong together on the international stage and sticking up for the Ukrainians. I think that's some of the things that the country is also talking about, Mrs. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Yes, stronger together. As the Prime Minister seen the pound, I think the financial markets are giving their judgment on this Prime Minister. You know, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister can afford to live in his own little world, his own little Britain. But people have to live with the reality of a failing Westminster system. A cost of living crisis worse in the UK than any other G7 country. An inflation rate double that of France. The second worst economic growth forecast in the G20, next to only sanctioned Russia. And now, a threat of a trade war with our European friends, triggered by a law-breaking Prime Minister. That is not a vision for the future of Scotland. Our nation is big enough, rich enough and smart enough. Isn't it the case, Prime Minister, that Scotland simply can't afford to remain trapped in the failing Westminster system? Mr. Speaker, stop the world. Scotland wants to get on.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think that the figures speak for themselves. The UK has record numbers of people in payroll employment. That's an astounding thing when you consider where we were during the pandemic. That was because of the UK working well together, as he will remember, with the vaccine rollout, with the testing, which Scotland and the rest of the country cooperated brilliantly. And, Mr. Speaker, he talks about a trade war. He talks about a trade war. What could be more foolish, Mr. Speaker, than a project that actually envisages trade barriers within parts of the United Kingdom? That's what we're trying to break down.
Craig Tracy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. During the Jubilee celebrations, I was honoured to share part of them with Cohort 4, an inspirational mentoring and support group who provide life-changing support to a wide range of women, such as those who've tragically been the victim of domestic violence, sexual abuse or suffer from mental health difficulties. Sadly, as a result of the pandemic, the need for these services has only grown. So would the Prime Minister join me in thanking Beverly and her team for the incredible work that they do at Cohort 4 and set out what more government can do to support these organisations so they can continue to deliver the vital care to vulnerable men and women across all of our constituencies?
I thank my honourable friend. I want to extend my thanks also to Beverly and everybody in Cohort 4 for what they're doing. The extra support that we're giving includes £140 million of funding for victims' services and £47 million ring-fenced, particularly for organisations such as Cohort 4. Thank you to Cohort 4 and similar organisations for everything that they do.
David.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition in paying tribute to our armed forces and sending our thanks and gratitude to the veterans of the Falklands War and their families? Mr. Speaker, millions of families across our country are suffering because of the cost of living emergency. And people in rural areas are especially hurting, bearing the brunt of record fuel price rises. The Rural Fuel Duty Relief Scheme is supposed to help by taking money off the price of petrol. But some rural counties aren't eligible, like Cumbria, like Shropshire and like Devon. Mr. Speaker, the Conservative Party want to hear ideas to help those people, and I think the people of Devon will note. Because there are families and pensioners across rural counties who are missing out on this support. So, Mr. Speaker, as petrol prices soar, will the Prime Minister accept our idea to help people in rural counties and expand rural fuel duty relief?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we cut fuel duty for everybody across the country by record sums. He talks about pensioners, Mr. Speaker. We're giving £850 more to every pensioner across the country. And he talks about the cost of energy. Everybody is going to get another £400 to help them with the costs of energy. And the blissful fact about the Liberal Democrats, Mr. Speaker, is people don't actually know what their policies are. And they're able to go around the country. They're able to go around the country bamboo bamboozling the rural communities, not revealing that they're in fact in favour of massive new green taxes, Mr. Speaker, which is what they want, and not revealing that they would like to go back straight away into the common agricultural policy with all the bureaucracy and all the costs that entails. They don't say that on the doorstep, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. There are proposals for up to 10,000 housing units on flood-prone greenfield sites to the west of Ifield in my constituency that would also represent intolerable pressure on local services. Can I have an assurance from the Prime Minister that as we update planning legislation, we will enshrine the brownfield principle first for new developments and save our environment and our services?
Prime Minister.
My honourable friend is completely right, and we encourage the use of suitable brownfield land, and our policy is for brownfield first, everywhere and always.
Neil Hanby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the Prime Minister will know from my recent correspondence that my Kirkcaldy and Cowdenbeath constituent, Ruth Zuccarello, is the sister of Jim Fitton, who is currently imprisoned in Iraq and sentenced to 15 years for collecting some shards of pottery. The judge passing sentence did not believe that Mr. Fitton had any criminal intent. And this has obvious and significant implications for Jim and his loved ones. So I would ask the Prime Minister if he would be willing to meet with me and other MPs who have constituents in Jim's family to discuss this case so that we can work in concert to resolve some of those issues.
Well, I'm really grateful to the honourable gentleman for raising Mr. Fitton's case, and I have a great deal of sympathy, I must say, with him. I'll make sure that he gets the honourable gentleman gets a meeting with the relevant minister as soon as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of my youngest constituents, little Nellie Oakshott, is 2 years old and has been diagnosed with metachromatic leukodystrophy. Her very brave parents, Megan and Tom, are supporting a campaign to see MLD added to the newborn blood spot test. Had that been included in the test, Nellie's condition could be treated. Now, the family are squaring up to palliative care and planning to make every day count. Will the Prime Minister give his support to add MLD to this heel prick test so that families in the future can be spared this same heartbreak?
I thank her very much, and I know that the thoughts of everybody will be with Nellie and her parents, Tom and Megan, in a very, very difficult time. And what I can tell her is that the National Screening Committee has received a request to look again at the conditions for doing an MLD test, and that is currently being reviewed right now. But I will make sure that she gets a meeting as soon as possible with the relevant minister.
Liz Twist.
Mr. Speaker, in just 5 days, rail passengers across the UK and in the North East will be facing huge disruption.
Do you want to listen?
No, we don't. But on the eve of the biggest rail dispute in a generation, it's emerged that ministers have not held any talks whatsoever since March. So, Mr. Speaker, I ask the Prime Minister.
You've done out.
I ask the Prime Minister, has he met with trade unions and employers in the rail industry to attempt to bring this dispute to an end? Yes or no?
Mr. Speaker, I noticed that what one union baron was asked about this. He said, "I don't negotiate with the Tory government," is what he said. That's what they said, Mr. Speaker. We all know how much money the Labour front bench take from the RMT, Mr. Speaker. We know why they're sitting on their hands during Labour's rail strikes. They should come out and condemn it, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today is Pension Credit Awareness Day. Pension credit is currently underclaimed. Around a quarter of those entitled don't claim it. So all my right honourable friend, join me in encouraging people in Gedling and throughout the country to check their eligibility, make that claim so we can get more money into the pockets of pensioners.
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, it's a very, very worthwhile and important campaign that my honourable friend supports. Too many pensioners fail to take up their entitlements under pension credit. It can be worth another £3,300 a year, and the more we can do to make pensioners aware of it, the better.
Anna Mackmore.
Thank you. Why is it that the worst people often rise to the highest office and stay there? Not my words about the Prime Minister, but those of his newest appointment, his cost of living czar. Families across Cardiff North, crippled with skyrocketing bills, unable to afford even the most basic necessities, all agree with him, saying this Prime Minister has to go. So if his own czar doesn't even have faith in him, tell me why those struggling should.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, she's asked that question repeatedly, but let me just remind her that this is a government that gets on and delivers on our promises to the people, and in particular getting Brexit done. I read the other day, Mr. Speaker, that she wants to go back into the single market and into the customs union. I think if that's the real policy of the Labour Party, Mr. Speaker, going back into the EU, then why won't the leader of the opposition admit it?
But Timpson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. When our family adopted my two brothers in the 1980s, support for adopters, whether that be financial, therapeutic or professional, was minimal. And by the time I became a family law barrister in the late 1990s, it really wasn't much better. Efforts since, particularly the Adoption Support Fund from 2015 onwards, has improved the situation, but as ever, there's much more that we can do. And to that end, would my right honourable friend look at making self-employed adopters eligible for statutory adoption pay so they can also have a better and fairer start to family life?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable friend, and he's a great champion for adopters and all those who help give children a loving and stable home. We've so far focused on supporting, he's quite right, we're focused on supporting employed parents, but local authorities do have the power to provide discretionary payments equivalent to maternity allowance for self-employed adopters as well.
Gary McCarthy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We know that at times of economic hardship, suicide rates are likely to rise too. We saw that after the 2008 crash. So as well as doing more to support people through the cost of living crisis, will the Prime Minister commit to doing more to support excellent suicide prevention campaigns like CALM, the campaign against living miserably, and also implement Labour's pledge that anyone in need of it should be able to access mental health counselling within a month, an end to waiting lists?
Prime Minister.
She's entirely right, Mr. Speaker, and we must focus ever more on mental health. That's why we're putting another £2.3 billion into supporting mental health services, including suicide prevention and the many wonderful charities that help people with their conditions, Mr. Speaker. And you know, all I can say is it would be a good thing if across the floor of this House we had support for the spending that we're putting in.
David Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The conflict in Ukraine and the consequent disruption of the supply chain in wheat has highlighted the need for the United Kingdom to become more self-sufficient in food. The Genetic Technology Bill, which has its second reading this afternoon, will help create the conditions to enable English farmers to produce more food of higher quality. But does my right honourable friend agree that the drive to self-sufficiency requires a UK-wide effort? And will he urge the devolved administrations to adopt the provisions of the bill so that farmers across Britain can produce the food that the country needs?
Prime Minister.
My honourable friend is completely right that currently the policy, of course, the bill only applies to England. He's completely right, but in a loving and sharing way, we are going to work with the devolved administrations, Mr. Speaker, so that the whole of the UK can enjoy the benefits.
Sorry, Champion.
Mental health support is vital for victims of sexual crimes. When a Rotherham survivor, who's here today, reported her childhood abuse to the police, they told her not to go for counselling as it could be used against her in court. Your Attorney General is challenging the rules, so it's even easier for defence teams to access victims' counselling notes, having an immediate chilling effect. Survivors shouldn't be forced to choose between their mental health and justice. Prime Minister, please stop this.
Well, I'm very interested to hear what she says, and I will look at the evidence that she has. But these are very sensitive and very difficult issues, particularly as regards the defence cases. But if she looks at what's happening, for instance, on rape and serious sexual offences, where we've had very similar problems, we are starting to see gradually an improvement in the prosecution rates, and that is because governments across departments across Whitehall working together to take account of victims' needs. And I agree that progress isn't everything that I would like, but we are seeing progress.
My right honourable friend may be aware that the Shrewsbury and Telford Hospital Trust has recently submitted a revised outline business case in support of its £312 million capital allocation made by the Department of Health 4 years ago. Does he agree with me that in order to make progress and complete the ambitious hospital building programme, the NHS decision-making processes not only need to be levelled up, they need to be speeded up?
Prime Minister. I think, Mr. Speaker, that the right honourable gentleman certainly speaks for many in this House in wanting faster decisions on planning in the NHS. But what you also, and that's what we're doing, we're pushing through, as he knows, 40 hospitals 40 hospitals we are building, Mr. Speaker, and what that needs is the funding. And I just tactfully point out again, the opposition benches bellowing away. They voted against the extra £39 billion that we're putting in.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My constituent, Mr. Singh's identity has been stolen. His NHS records are being misused, but he's been advised there is nothing the Health Secretary can do. Crimes are being committed in his name. The Home Secretary's department assured him that this would not affect his immigration status. Yet recently, he, his wife and children were detained by UK Border Force whilst travelling for a family holiday. Can the Prime Minister explain who in his government is responsible for this chaotic incompetence?
Mr. Speaker, I'd be only too happy to look at and I'm very sorry for the experience that Mr. Singh and his family have had. And I ask who's responsible. I'm responsible, Mr. Speaker, and but I will look at the case. I'll make sure that she gets a proper answer from the Home Office and the Immigration Department.
Theresa May.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent, Dominique Davis, is the niece of Dom Phillips, the British journalist missing in Brazil, alongside the Indigenous expert Bruno Pereira. Will my right honourable friend ensure that the government makes this case a diplomatic priority and that it works to do everything it can to ensure that the Brazilian authorities put the resources necessary to uncover the truth and find out what has happened to Dom and Bruno?
I thank my right honourable friend very much, and I can tell her that for representing the niece of Dom Phillips, and of course, like everybody in this House, we're deeply concerned about what may have happened to him. FCDO officials are working closely now with the Brazilian authorities following his disappearance on the 5th of June. The minister responsible has raised the issue repeatedly, the search and rescue effort with Brazil's Justice and Public Security Minister, and what we've told the Brazilians, Mr. Speaker, is we stand ready to provide, Madam Deputy Speaker, I should say, we stand ready to provide all the support that they may need.
Thank you. Point of order, Selene Saxby.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I just wondered if you could advise how I could correct the record for the Right Honourable Member for Kingston and Surbiton's question, where he raised the matter of rural fuel duty relief and incorrectly advised that it was not available in Devon, and that in my North Devon constituency that I clearly know quite well on this side of the House, the EX35 postcode of Linton, their fuel retailers have had access to this duty for some time. How might we address this situation, Madam Deputy?
So that was Prime Minister's question time for another week. The Labour leader and the Prime Minister traded blows over the economy. and the tax burden. Shortly, the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, within a few moments, will be making a statement to MPs on the Rwanda flight that did not take off. Yvette Cooper will be responding for the Labour Party. Right now, we are just seeing some points of order in relation to PMQs, but the Home Secretary will be on her feet in just a moment. There is the Deputy Speaker, Rosie Winterton, responding to various points of order by MPs as we, and there are many of them today. Let's go back live to the Commons.
Disgrace.
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for her point of order. Frankly, the level of noise during PMQs meant it was not possible for the Chair to hear everything. But I understand that the Prime Minister, as she says, did say that the opposition was on the side of people traffickers. That seems to me, and I have to say to the Speaker, to fall well short of the good temper and moderation which should characterise our debates. And I say to the Prime Minister and to all members here, we need to refer to each other in this place in more respectful terms. And I'm sure that in that spirit will be adopted in the statement to come. Point of order.
Madam Deputy Speaker, as Chair of the International Trade Committee, it's with dismay of the committee that we found out that the government was to trigger the CRAG process on the Australia-UK FTA before the scrutiny was finished. This, in light of assurances to the Speaker of the House in a letter, assurances on the floor of the House on the 17th of November 2021 at the dispatch box from a Minister of the DIT, and also to the committee itself, that that scrutiny would be allowed to happen before CRAG was triggered. This has not happened. What is happening is the UK is opening and rolling out the red carpet to Australian exporters to the UK, while Australia is not ratifying. Madam Deputy Speaker, we and the committee feel there should be a vote at the very least to delay CRAG. Can you advise us how best we can achieve that end?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his point of order. It has not related directly to PMQs, so it should actually have been taken later. But he has, obviously, ministers should stick to commitments that they have made, and I'm sure he will find a number of ways in order to further the points that he has made. Thank you. Statement, Home Secretary Priti Patel.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And with permission, I would like to make a statement about the government's world-leading migration and economic development partnership with Rwanda. The British people have repeatedly voted for controlled immigration and the right to secure borders, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is a government that acts and hears that message clearly, and we are determined to deliver that. Last night, Madam Deputy Speaker, we aimed to relocate the first people from our country who arrived here through dangerous and illegal means, including by small boat. Over the course of this week, many and various claims to prevent relocation have been brought forward. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I welcome the decisions of our domestic courts, the High Court, the Court of Appeal and Supreme Court to uphold our right to send the flight. However, following a decision by an out-of-hours judge in the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, minutes before our flight's departure, the final individuals remaining on the flight had their removal directions paused while their claims were considered. I want to make something absolutely clear today, Madam Deputy Speaker. The European Court of Human Rights did not rule that the policy or relocations were unlawful, but they prohibited the removal of 3 of those on last night's flight. Those prohibitions last for different time periods, but are not an absolute bar on their transfer to Rwanda. Anyone who's been ordered to be released by the courts will be tagged while we continue to progress their relocation. While this decision by the Strasbourg court to intervene was disappointing, and surprising given the repeated and considered judgments to the contrary in our domestic courts, we remain committed to this policy. These repeated legal barriers are, Madam Deputy Speaker, very similar to those that we experience with all other removal flights, and we believe that we are fully compliant with our domestic and international obligations, and preparations for our future flights and the next flights have already begun. Our domestic courts were of the view that the flight could go ahead. Madam Deputy Speaker, the case for our partnership with Rwanda bears repeating. We are a generous and welcoming country, as has been shown time and time again. Over 20,000 people have used safe and legal routes to come to the UK since 2015. And most recently, Madam Deputy Speaker, Britons have opened their hearts and their homes to Afghan nationals and Ukrainian nationals. But our capacity to help those in need is severely compromised by those who come here illegally, and as we've discussed in this House many, many times, who seek to jump the queue because they can afford to pay the people smugglers. It is illegal. It is not necessary because they are coming from other safe countries. It is not fair either on those who play by the rules or on the British taxpayers who have to foot this bill. We cannot keep on spending nearly £5 million a day on accommodation, including that of hotels. We cannot accept this intolerable pressure on public services and local communities. It makes us less safe as a nation because those who come here illegally do not have the regularised checks or even the regularised status. And because evil people smuggling gangs use the proceeds of their ill-gotten gains to fund other appalling crimes that undermine the security of our country. It is also lethally dangerous for those who are smuggled. People have drowned at sea, suffocated in lorries, and perished crossing territories. The humane, decent and moral response to all of this is simply not to stand by and let people down, or to be sold into slavery, or to be smuggled, but to stop this. And with that, Madam Deputy Speaker, inaction is not an option, or at least not a morally responsible one. This is, as I've said repeatedly, a complex, long-standing problem. The global asylum system is broken, and between 80 to 100 million people are now displaced, and others are on the move, seeking better economic opportunities. And an international problem requires international solutions. The UK and Rwanda have shown the way forward by working together. And this partnership sends a clear message that illegal entry will not be tolerated, Madam Deputy Speaker, while offering a practical, humane way forward for those who arrive to the UK via illegal routes. It has saddened me, Madam Deputy Speaker, to see Rwanda so terribly misrepresented and traduced in recent weeks. It is another example of how all too often critics not only don't know what they're speaking about, but seek to vilify another international country that has a good track record when it comes to refugees and stepping up to international responsibilities. Rwanda, Madam Deputy Speaker, is a safe and secure country with an outstanding track record of supporting refugees and asylum seekers. And indeed, we are proud that we are working together. Proud that the UK is investing in Rwanda and helping that great country to thrive. And proud that those who are relocated to Rwanda will have an opportunity to thrive as well. They will be given generous support, including language skills, vocational training, and help with starting their own businesses or finding employment. But of course, I'm afraid, Madam Deputy Speaker, the usual suspects, with the blessings of honourable and right honourable members opposite, have set out the thought and even campaign against these efforts, and with that, Madam Deputy Speaker, the will of the British people. It would be wrong to issue a running commentary over ongoing cases, but Madam Deputy Speaker, I would like to say this. This government will not be deterred from doing the right thing. We will not be put off by the inevitable legal last-minute challenges, nor we will allow mobs, Madam Deputy Speaker, to block removals. We will not stand idly by and let organised crime gangs, who are despicable in their nature and their conduct, evil people, treat human beings as cargo. We will not accept that we have no right to control our borders, Madam Deputy Speaker. We will do everything necessary to keep this country safe, and we will continue our long and proud tradition of helping those in genuine need. Now, many of us have met refugees, both abroad and on British soil, and listened to the stories that are quite frankly chilling and heartbreaking. But of course it suits the benches opposite to pretend that this side of the House doesn't care. But Madam Deputy Speaker, as you referred to in the earlier point of order, on this side of the House, such accusations are a grotesque slur. And let me tell you, Madam Deputy Speaker, what is truly chilling is listening to opponents going on about how awful this policy is, while offering no practical solutions, while lives are being lost, helping develop safe and legal routes to this country for those who really need them is absolutely at the heart of this government's work. And having overseen efforts to bring to the UK thousands of people in absolute need, including from Hong Kong, Syria, Afghanistan and Ukraine. And I am the first to say that controlled immigration is good for our country, outstanding for our country, including that by refugees. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, we simply have to focus on the support of those who need it the most, and not those who have picked the UK as a destination over a safe country like France. And it is no use pretending that they are fleeing persecution when they are travelling from a safe country, because our capacity to help is not infinite, and public support for the asylum system will be fatally undermined if we do not act. And along with the critics of the Migration and Economic Development Partnership have no alternative proposal to deal with uncontrolled immigration. And like on so many other issues, the parties opposite, the Labour Party and the SNP, are on the wrong side of the argument, and we will only see with their arguments public trust in the system being corroded. That is irresponsible and utterly indifferent to those who we seek to help and support. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I have always said that I will look at all proposals to reduce illegal migration and illegal entry to our country, and even those that the opposite benches might prepare to put forward, but we still wait for them. However, he says that. However, fundamentally, they don't think there is a problem, and that is why they don't have a solution, because they still remain and stand for open borders, pure and simple. Meanwhile, this government wants to get on with delivering, not just on what the British people want, but reforming our systems, so that they are firm, but equally, Madam Deputy Speaker, so that they are fair to those who pay for them and fair on those who need our help and support.
Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is a shambles, and it is shameful, and the Home Secretary has no one but herself to blame. This is not, and never has been, a serious policy, and she knew that when she chartered the plane. She knew that among the people she was planning to send to Rwanda on this plane were torture and trafficking victims. She knew she didn't have a proper screening process in place. She knew that some of them might be children. So can she confirm it was the Home Office itself that withdrew a whole series of these cases on Friday and yesterday because they knew there was a problem with these cases, that even without the European Court of Human Rights judgment, she was planning to send a plane with just 7 people on board because she'd had to withdraw most of the cases at the last minute. She knows that there is a lack of proper asylum capacity in Rwanda to make fair decisions, that as the UNHCR says, they only normally deal with a few hundred cases a year. There's normally only one eligibility officer who prepares the cases, and that's as well as the lack of interpreters or legal advice to ensure fair decisions. Now, she promised there will be extra payments to Rwanda for each person that is transferred, presumably to pay for those extra caseworkers or extra support, but she still refused to tell us how much. So what is she hiding? Will she tell us now how much she promised Rwanda for each of the people she was planning to send yesterday, and how many Rwandan refugees she promised to take in return? She knows that serious concerns have been raised about Rwandan restrictions on political freedom, on the treatment of people who are LGBT, on the fact that 12 refugees were shot by the authorities in 2018 for protesting against food cuts, on the fact that there have been Afghan and Syrian asylum seekers returned by Rwanda, and she knows that none of those concerns have been addressed. She knows too that the policy will not work. We need action to tackle dangerous criminal gangs who are putting lives at risk. But she knows that her policies won't achieve that, and that is not their objective. Because if it was, she would not have asked the National Crime Agency, whose job it is to target the criminal gangs, to draw up 20% staff cuts. That is potentially 1,000 people being cut from the organisation that works to tackle the gangs. So can she confirm, has she asked the NCA to draw up plans for staff cuts? If she was serious, she would be taking seriously the fact that the Israel-Rwanda deal ended up increasing criminal people trafficking and smuggling, and that her plan risks making things worse. And if it was, she would be working night and day to get a better joint plan with France to crack down on the gangs and to stop the boats being put into the water in the first place. But she isn't, because her relationship with French ministers has totally broken down. If she was serious about tackling illegal migration, illegal economic migration, or cutting the bills for people in hotels, she would be speeding up Home Office decision-making so refugees can get support and those who aren't can be returned home. Instead, her decisions have totally collapsed from 28,000 a year to just 14,000 decisions a year, fewer than Belgium, the Netherlands, never mind Germany or France. And she's so badly failing to take those basic decisions, she is trying to pay a country thousands of miles away to take decisions for us instead. How shameful does that make us look around the world if our Home Office cannot take those basic decisions? She knew about problem after problem with her policy. She knows this is unworkable, unethical, and won't stop the criminal gangs. But yet, she still went ahead and spent £500,000 chartering a plane she never expected to fly. She still went ahead and wrote a £120 million cheque to Rwanda with a promise of more to come. And she still went ahead because all she really cares about is picking fights and finding someone else to blame. This isn't a long-term plan, it is a short-term stunt. Everyone can see it. It's not serious policy, it's shameless posturing, and she knows it. It's not building consensus, it's just pursuing division. It is government by gimmick. It's not in the public interest, it's just in their political interest. And what are they prepared to trash along the way? People's lives, our basic British values of fairness, decency and common sense, and the reputation of our nation. Our country is better than this. We've a long tradition of hard work and stepping up to tackle problems, not to offload them, to tackle the criminal gangs who put lives at risk, and to do right by refugees. That is what she should be doing now, and not this shambles that is putting our country to shame.
Madam Deputy Speaker, well, I always look forward to these exchanges in the House, it's fair to say. Primarily because, well, perhaps if you'd like to listen to them as well. Let me just respond by saying, as a point of education, if I may, for the Honourable Lady opposite, we're not the only country in the world to be adopting this approach, it's fair to say. The Right Honourable Lady may be aware, Madam Deputy Speaker, that it's an approach the EU have adopted through their EU transfer mechanism to Rwanda. And Denmark themselves are in the process, already in the process of looking at this. But she raises a number of points which are also factually incorrect. I'll come to you shortly, if you don't mind. That the purpose of the work that we are doing is absolutely, Madam Deputy Speaker, to break the business model of the people smugglers. And it's a shame, actually, that the party opposite, run down the National Crime Agency, because actually, again, come calm down a second, because actually it's the UK intelligence community that are working together, tackling the people smugglers upstream, along with the way in which we invest in upstream programmes to tackle the people smugglers. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, I've got more to say on this, of course, because the members opposite keep speaking about asylum seekers that have travelled from Iran, Iraq and other countries. But, of course, they've come from France, Madam Deputy Speaker, a safe country. They haven't come from Iraq, they've come from France. In the same way the lady opposite says they've come from Syria, they've come from France. They've paid people smugglers, and they don't claim that it's immoral to send people back to European countries where their claims can be considered there. It is literally, Madam Deputy Speaker, the logic of the opposition seems to be that Rwanda is a wonderful country, good enough to host international summits and world dignitaries, but not for people to be relocated there, as our global partnership has demonstrated. And they know that people are dying in the Channel, but they simply do not have a single workable solution between them. And they are choosing sides here, while this government is committed to pioneering a way forward. And of course, the party opposite are now clutching at straws when they come to speaking about money. But of course, you cannot put a price on lives that are lost, and we believe in saving lives and breaking the people smuggling model. And of course, Madam Deputy Speaker, when it comes to the claims, the legal claims that I think the Honourable Lady was referring to, pre-action protocol, NRM claims, I do not remember the lady opposite, the Shadow Home Secretary, making these points in this sort of synthetic hypothetical rage when she occupied the seat in a previous Labour government where they brought in acts and powers and passed the 1999 Act, the 2002 Act, the 2004 Act, basically to remove people with no legal basis to be in this country. And these are the same powers that we are using to remove individuals with no legal right to be in these countries. And of course, these are exactly the same powers that only recently and again today she was saying that could be used if we hadn't left the EU. And yet again, the Honourable Lady, the party opposite, talks about the policy being unworkable and extortionate, but it can't be both, because clearly we've said from the outset, that this is a partnership based on working with Rwanda. And if I may, Madam Deputy Speaker, there is nothing more humane than turning a blind eye to those that are being smuggled, not just across the Channel, but also in lorries. And we have a global collective responsibility to work with international partners, which clearly the party opposite have shut the door firmly on doing.
You've been watching or listening to PMQs Live with me, Gloria Di Piero. Join me again tomorrow at noon. The time is 1 o'clock. It is time for your news headlines with Tamsin.
Good afternoon. It's 1 o'clock. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. The Home Secretary has said inaction over illegal immigration to the UK is not a morally responsible option. Speaking in the Commons, Priti Patel expressed disappointment over the cancellation of the first flight due to carry asylum seekers to Rwanda, but insisted the last-minute injunctions by the European Courts of Human Rights is not a bar on the policy. She said she won't be deterred from the plans and said the government is determined to find a way forward.
I want to make something absolutely clear today, Madam Deputy Speaker.